Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for spending time with me on this topic. We're going to cover the threat condition in Ukraine, and we'll provide a few insights that we've collected, guidance, and some assistance that can be provided as required. My name's Mark Fernandez, and I'm the Global Technology Officer for CyberRes, which is a division of Microfocus. What we're going to cover today is effectively four quick things. We won't spend more than 10 minutes. First of all, understand the threat. So just zooming out and understanding the timelines and the threat landscape. B will visualize the threat using an online platform called Galaxy that any of you can use and subscribe to. Number three, we'll talk about tactics and measures, which include both offensive and defensive capability. And then D will cover some guidance and help that can be provided as required. What we're going to cover here is a TLP white briefing. There is a much more sensitive briefing that can be provided to specific governments and enterprises as required. So let's get going. So first of all, let's just zoom out and provide an overview of the threat condition. We'll look back in time and talk about the deconstruction of the threat itself. So first of all, just using a doctrine that many of you have seen before, it shows about the life cycle of conflict from both military operations and a hybrid warfare standpoint, which includes cyber. And this is a doctrine that's been published and talked about quite extensively out there that looks at, the state of continuous conflict management from peacetime operations all the way to restorations of peace. If we zoom out and look at the timelines of the region and what's happened specifically related to what's happening in Ukraine, it's gone back in time, but we're not going to go back 200 years, but just from 2007, the activities has really escalated over time. But what's more important here is the techniques have evolved as well. Where we used to see denial of service and tools associated with that, we're seeing more use of covert operation smoke screens and AI-led operations as well. What's more important is to talk about sort of the multi-channel federated way of the way industries are being targeted. Before, cyber defense was really focused around one specific industry, but now there's actually a linkage between industries, and the ability to coordinate across multiple ministries, divisions, and agencies becoming extremely important, and to look at the relationship between them. Obviously, right now we are in a threat condition that's between escalation and pre-conflict, and essentially, when you look at the industries being targeted, they fall within that. Now, let's talk about three scenarios that could happen. The first scenario is we stay status quo, and we stay currently where we are for a few months. Scenario B is to think about conflicts, that may erupt and war breaks out, and obviously we don't want that. And hopefully, which will be the most likely outcome, will be de-escalation. And what we'll do is we'll look at each of them in terms of what to expect. So first of all, before we go into how to break out the cyber preparedness associated with it, let's talk about operational tactics scenarios. So there are six tactics that we will overlay from a tactics standpoint. The first one is preparatory activity, covert espionage and counterintelligence activity, operational readiness activity, proof of concept capability, conflict measures, and then smokescreen or diversionary or distraction type of techniques being used. So if we overlay from what many of you have seen, which is the MITRE attack framework, and we do an overlay on scenario A, which is status quo, we see a lot of activity around proof of concept, which is the red or the pink in this case. You see a lot of operational readiness activity, and you see covert and espionage activity associated, that's in yellow. If we were to go into scenario B, which is conflict, a lot of these techniques will move into conflict tactics, which basically accompanies kinetic activity associated with hybrid warfare. You're likely going to see smokescreen activity as well, where traditional techniques like such as DDoS is really a distraction for what is the primary mission, which is covert operations or basically land grab type of activity, which is command and control activity associated with them. So the techniques which will move in this direction is really targeted around the land grab and the expansion and the disruption created. If we get into deconfliction, we'll actually see a move more into operational readiness and covert operations, which includes espionage and counterintelligence. Now, how can you visualize this for yourself? So there's two versions of Galaxy that I'll show you. The first one's available online to enterprise accounts. So just if you do register, just make sure it's an enterprise account. It's available to anyone in unsanctioned countries to register. So within Galaxy, CyberRes Galaxy, you can register in here. You can go into Launch Galaxy. You can use this with any SIM or security analytics platform out there. It doesn't need to be CyberRes or ArcSight in general. And you can visualize it based on your registration, based on the geographies being targeted, the sectors being targeted, and everything in between in here. You can look at it by business risk. You can look at it by campaign. You can look at it by adversary. In Galaxy, you have a constellation view in that grouping of targets in here are based on a specific linkage within specific attributes of threats. So, for example, if I want to look at the most relevant threats related to Ukraine, you can select on filters and then go into Ukraine, Crimea stresses and look at the threats related to that. But I'm going to zoom out right now and just show you specifically how that's relevant and what that means. If you were to look at Ukraine, Crimea digital risk, which is that big red circle that you can see within the constellation, you can look at how it's related to other techniques associated with it. And by the way, there's another version that has a lot more information. And then from here, you can look at what are related threats that you need to think about and the tactics and countermeasures associated with that. By related tactics, by sector-based views or actor-based view in general. Now, let's quickly talk about how to prepare and what to look for. So first of all, using our global adversary sensing capability, let's talk about how exposed we are from a global standpoint. So on top is basically what we are observing as activity related to initial access broker and other types of related activity. So a fairly high global activity around proxy infrastructure. Infrastructure is used in conflict type of electronic warfare. On the bottom is C2 activity, which is used for command and control, also data exfiltration. Very healthy. We're seeing a lot of activity around it. So let's quickly talk about the countries where we're seeing the most amount of activity. So from a C2 activity, so once again, that's command and control and data exfiltration, listed from the most active all the way to, sort of trending away from the most active. You see the countries out there from Romania all the way to Poland. We're seeing a lot of activity related to this. If you're in any of those countries and you want to see the specifics around this, please contact us. We'll qualify that it's a government agency or something related to a government agency that then we'll provide you with a private briefing. And then from an IAB, which is basically infrastructure that's used from basically a dropper or other type of activity from the United States all the way to Canada and everything in between and has exposure. So tactics and measures, let's quickly talk about that. Gen 1 techniques that we saw 10, 15 years ago, which will likely still be used now, but they're pivoting more around disruption and smokescreen activity that's really used as a distractionary method. But, we'll talk about Gen 2 in a second. All the way from ABT DDoS to reflected DDoS to UFO nets to attack variants and targeting of soft targets. So targeting of SCADA environments, of open IoT devices, etc. Gen 2 is when we start to get into a much more sophisticated methods being used, mostly for covert operations, espionage, all the way from live off the land to other techniques being used. Okay, let's just summarize real quick and talk about how you can get help and what tools. So we talked about you can register on CyberRes Galaxy. This is a TLP white platform that's online in that it doesn't have all the records that are available to governments. But suddenly you can get some of the unclassified bulletins in here by just registering. You don't have to be a CyberRes customer to use it, but you can certainly register and use it. If you're in any of the governments that want to get a private preview, we can show you the more classified view of this as well. In terms of specific private sessions we can have our counter adversary teams provide you with specific exposure analysis, a view on cross-department agency exposure, situational awareness on specific agencies being targeted and countermeasures that are being deployed. So who do you contact? Certainly, you can contact myself, Mark Fernandez at microfocus.com, but based on your regions, there's a number of contacts that you can reach out to across North America, across Asia and Australia, global, Europe, etc. So, in conclusion, I want to thank you for your time on this session, and wishing we, sort of hoping we get into scenario C, which is really deconfliction, but being prepared for the other two as well. So, thank you for your time, and hope to meet you in person sometime soon. Thank you. Bye for now.